Thanks, Claire. So Nomada, this is a tough one for people, and it should be because I would say that every Nomada name out there is ultimately would be involved in some sort of synonymization. So things will be added to it or subtracted, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along. But the main issue has always been that there's a lot of color variation in Nomada species almost across the board that people were not aware of, or because it didn't have molecular techniques in particular. And so a lot of those color variations became species, and people in their, like Swank was a good person to do. He renamed a whole bunch of species from his work in Nebraska that were really just the same things further east. So beware of that. I'm going to flip now to the B genera memorization scripts, and we'll just kind of cover in a very broad way, and then we'll get right into some specimens and look at all the somewhat specialized things. So Nomada as a genus is a parasitic group. They mostly parasitize bees in the genus Andrena, but there are quite a few that leak out into other genera. So there's one group that, large ones that are parasitizing Eucera. There are, I'm thinking mostly East Coast stuff. There's some that are in Halictidae. So in particular, Agapostumum are parasitized by Nomada articulata, and what's the other? It's not Australis. It is maybe Australis. Anyway, trying not to get down into the species level too much. We will return though, and they have because they're nest parasites, they don't have scopal hairs. In fact, one of the problems with Nomada is a lot of times they get separated out as wasps, and you'll see a bunch of examples, which is another reason to keep wasps and pin them up as you go along, particularly if you're starting, but also particularly if you have technicians too, because there are a lot that just really look like wasps. And I have been a little too quick on some of my sortings and pulled out a couple Nomada and put them into the non-bee categories. So if we look here at our bee memorization chart, I'm going to sneeze, I think. Am I going to sneeze? Maybe I'm not. All right, I'm going to drink some water here for a second. This, when we look at the female, so the basic, I'll just read this. It says thin and wasp-like, most commonly the head, thorax, and abdomen are bright red, and the first specimen we'll show is like that. In the female, in general, the female has a lot more probability, let's call it, of having red markings in some groups, and the males have a lot more likelihood of having yellow markings in comparison to the opposite sex.
And
but
you can always blow up the screen in the lower right-hand corner.
Say it again.
You can blow up the screen in the lower right-hand corner.
Lower right-hand corner.
Yeah, right around there.
Right.
Nope.
Oh, I see.
To your left.
This thing. Mine does not. It does. It's grayed out.
Sorry.
Yeah, good point. Optimize for compatibility. Restart required. Okay. Yeah, sadly, this does not seem to be the case. That does look, we'll have to look into that thing down there. So they often have, so characteristically, they have bright red and yellow markings. I don't think there's any, at least the ones in the US, that are completely black. So both the males and females have something red or yellow. Yellow tends to be the marking, and red can sometimes take over, particularly in the females, but not solely in the females, take over as the base color of the integument. And so if we continue on this, so it doesn't have scopa. Okay, so there's no, in the female, there's no pollen carrying hairs. you will see this thing that we call the pseudopygidial area, which is easier to explain than show, but it's at the tip of T6. And there are these odd specialized thick curved setae on S5, so on the underside of the abdomen. But realistically, I have never used those as an ID tool, but you might at the beginning. With a little bit of practice, you can vibe a nomada pretty readily, and the pseudopygidial area in a female is super characteristic. Then the jubal lobe is very short compared to the frontal lobe. Again, not something that I have used in many years, but it is part of the traditional string of characters that you should look for when you're just getting familiar and you have little idea about what genus you might be looking at. So I'm going to stop there. We'll flip back to the males in a second. So let's take a look at this female I have here. I chose this female because this is the look, I'm going to say particularly in the East. In the West, it might be a little bit of a different pattern, but I would suspect the Pacific Northwest is similar. This is the look and feel of the average female nomada. There are many species and many different looks, but a lot of the spring nomada working off of the andrina look like this. And there are two clades of nomada, one of which I call the bidentate group, and other people have two for that matter. And I should back up and say morphologically, and I think even at the level of proposed subgenera, there's been a lot of action back and forth in terms of names and groups and what's considered to be a subgenus. And so it's kind of messy. And right now, I'm not sure that people are really using subgenera, at least very consistently, as a marker. But this bidentate group has traditionally been considered a subgenus. And it indeed comes out in terms of just doing the CO1 kind of molecular stuff as all related to each other. They cluster together, and they all have a tooth that's set back like a mitten from the tip. I will show that to you of the mandible, and it's important to look for that if you have anything that looks like this, but sometimes it's tricky if the mandibles are closed and there's a hair or a leg in the way. Sometimes it's very difficult to see that tooth. And the reason, though, it is important to see that is is a sister group, which I generally call the white CT group. White CT referring to the fact that on their legs, they have on the hind rear leg at the end of the tibia is a set of slightly thickened white CT. We'll get to the CD part here in a bit. It's a great but tricky to see character. Is this white CT group, and you cannot tell the two apart except whether the mandible is bidentate or not. So a lot of time these bidentate species get punted over into the white CT group, and because people missed the tooth on there. We'll get to that. So this is a very generic color pattern that you'll see, and we're getting a little bit into the species level, but it's kind of important to understand about color variation. So in this group of these in the females often red, within the same species, you can have an integument here on the scutum, which we often would look at, can be, and theoretically, the molecules are telling us the story that this can be all red or it can be all black. So, and everything in between. The pattern for maculations, as we might call them, or markings of these yellow spots on abdomen can be everything and still be the same species, everything from 0 markings here to smaller ones, but still present like this. And usually it builds along these lines. The first place to get markings is T2. This is across the board, as far as I can tell, that the very first place that markings are going to develop would be on T2, and then T3 is added. These markings then with each iteration, so you can get them on T4 and 5, and with each iteration, these markings up here can get bigger. At some point, sometimes they may even come close to forming a line with a break, and sometimes they're a complete line across. Usually, they don't get that crazy and still be the same species, but you'll see that in some cases that you can have almost that entire range from red and no markings to literally stripes of yellow across the tergites. So this area back here, so there's a sting. We know it's a female. We can count the antennal segments I'll tell you in the male when we get to it that counting antennal segments, you have to be a little bit careful because we go up here to the scape, and I'll show this more clearly. In the male, sometimes the pedicel is actually recessed into the scape. Not so much in the female, but you have to be aware when counting of this expanded scape capture. Back here is what we were talking about in the pseudopygidial area. You'll see here that there's this tuft of hairs. They're oppressed and low, and usually most species are something like this. And I'm going to now magnify this so you can see that better. See how we do here. And then we'll change the angle. But in some species, at its most extreme, this pseudopygidial area with these odd hairs, this odd brush, will extend well up that last tergite segment. And in some case, at the extreme, it can occupy most of the area. A lot of times, the pseudopygidial area is approximately like this, but I usually take a quick look at it in case there's a different shape to it. And sometimes, even though it might not be a character, it can be informative that maybe you're looking at something different if you have a very different look and feel to that pseudopygidial area. I'm going to shift it now so that we hopefully can get a different angle. This is more the angle you would look at when you were coming close, so you can see what we're looking at. In a few cases, not this group, but in other groups, it's a little bit difficult to see here, but let me point out what's going on. So here's the last abdominal segment. There's a sting. What you have here is that's the integument, and then it begins to be modified a little bit. It's still, see the integument by the addition of these largely prone, somewhat flattened, usually silvery hairs.
Can you sharpen that at all? Right now, it looks like the integument colors. Can't really tell that it's hairs.
Yeah, I don't know that I can.
Okay, well then just listen to the words.
Okay, so anyway, and it's very dense, so yeah, we might not get any definition out of this setup currently, but the in a few cases, and again, sometimes you just might notice that if you're at way high magnification, you'll see that the shape of these hairs is perhaps different enough to be useful in telling things apart. So in some species, like I mentioned, Nomada depressa, for example, that pseudopygidial area will run up here and often is very short hairs, so short you don't even notice them. But most species look basically along those lines. So here, you can't see them, but we're going to change that, are these little hairs on the underside of S5 that was mentioned in the guide as characteristics. They curve out like that. This is a bad cut, but I'm going to flip it so that you can see it better. And let's see if I can do that without poking myself. Let's see if I can re-find it in here. There we go. Get down lower. So this is characteristic, but like I said, after a while, you really don't need to, because flipping it over is time consuming. Need to see these, oops, I want to magnify this, modified hairs down here, but just to show you what they're talking about. And surprisingly, even though they're quite dramatic, I don't know of any time that they are actually used in identification. And I've looked at them plenty because it's one of my groups that I've spent a lot of time trying to get this light a little bit lower. A lot of time trying to work out ID problems. And now, what have I done? There we go. But it seems like they're all about the same patterns under there, or similarly not useful in telling species level things apart. But you can see various armature thickened CTs. CT would be, my understanding would be thickened hairs on there. And that's indicative of Nomada. So that could be a double check because you wouldn't see that in wasps, for example. And remember a long time ago, we talked about separation of wasps by the presence of forked hairs. Well, it is darn hard to find forked hairs on a Nomada. So really no one is looking at forked hairs in this situation. They're looking at other kinds of characters. And the vibe is one that very quickly you'll understand is useful. Okay, now I'm going to try and show you the, actually maybe upside down again is good. The mandibles of this thing. And this is a one I chose in particular because it is relatively clear that it is bidentate. So bidentate means two-toothed. And get my light back down there. That is blocking. Okay, so mandible, this one is on the underside of the other mandible. This mandible here is lapping the other one. And you'll see the tooth there and the tip there. All the other females and the males in the other groups, have a completely smooth single tooth going on type of mandible. This tooth here is present both in the males and the females. So it's a great character for at least separating out a big swath of species. At this point, though, I'm only identifying one species of bidentate Nomada, and that's Nomada maculata because it has a great secondary character. And the others I just call bidentate group because talk about a mess, a molecular mess. I've worked with several people to try and resolve that. And, you change the, your definition of molecular distance a little bit, all changes. So, but while we're here, here's the labrum, and there's almost always a little projection on the labrum, and it's useful at species level because that projection, in this case, in the middle, can sometimes be down here, sometimes further up, and sometimes in some in-between state. And the shape can be a dot or something more oblong. So I don't want to get too far into species level IDs because we are going to circle back on that.
It's the fact that there are two teeth on the mandible rather than a single point.
Yeah.
And can you remind us, is the bidentate group considered a single subgenus or multiple?
No one seems to know. The answer to that is I don't know. And I don't think anyone knows because it's not clear what the subgenus boundaries are. So I think Molly Reitmeyer was working on that, and I'm not sure if she came up with conclusions either. That work never got published. Molly, if you're listening, we would love to get that published, but I know you're busy. So, so this is the female look and feel. You know, we've talked about plenty about times about jugal lobe.
Real quick, another tooth question.
Okay.
Sometimes we have mandibles like 2 teeth but same length, which gives a quite rectangular end. Is it considered a bidentate?
Yes, but was that a nomada? Because mostly the nomada either have a single tooth or this mitten-like recessed tooth, not two teeth at the end. Other species do have that. If you're talking about other species, definitely yes. In Nomada, you almost never get a two teeth at the end. And it's only in this group that you actually do get 2 teeth. Okay,
Thanks.
right. I'm going to shift to a male now and a slightly different group, sometimes considered to be a subgenus, but it's controversial. Now, let me pull that from this box. Here we go. Oh, and let me just show, I'm going to go back because just to show you a tricky, not that we're going to get too far into species ID, but this is a tricky character, so I might as well show you now because a lot of people have a difficulty with this, which is a lot of the action for species level ID in Nomada has to do with the hind CT. I'm going to really crank this up and hopefully get it in view. I think I have to bring it down. There we go. All right. Very subtle, but really with a lot of important variation. Okay, so we'll start here. See if I can get a little more light on there. All right, so hind leg, and it's almost always the hind leg that where we're going to look. And at the tip, I'll see if I get a different view. See these long CT here, very different from the surrounding basal, usually white and thin hairs. The presence and type and number and shape and length of those hairs, of those CT, are really important for differentiating Nomada. Because a lot of times with all that variation in the color, this is a much more stable character most of the time. So that's what you're looking for, but it can be different colors. There can be like 20 or 30 of them sometimes. It's let me see. It's a slightly different view here. And all sorts of different shapes to that. Get that in the middle. Move it up. So this, I just want to give you like, this is where you should be looking. And these are the kinds of things that are important. So this has, it's just a slightly different view. But I want to point out a couple things. So this, in my parlance, has no name, but usually there's a little triangular projection that they seemingly all the females have. Again, I can't be 100%. That's a reference point, and then the CT, when we're looking for CT, would be nearby. And there's those 2 long CT again, long dark red in this case. That's a good indication of something. You know, usually all the, for example, all the bidentate group have long dark red CT. Sometimes there's many, sometimes there's few. And in a few cases, they're almost like a blade-like, knife-like structure. Lots of other variations of that, but now you kind of know where to look. All right, now let's go to a male. And we're looking at, oh, wait, I'll go with this one.
Any questions before we move on? All right.
Yeah.
All right, so this male is from a different group, sometimes called Holonomada, but no one's really, again, we're not clear what these subgenera are. And you won't see that in the Discover Life Guide. But this is a good, little too bright, maybe. Where's my shadow card? That Clippius. So one thing to note, lots more on this one, a lot more yellow, and that is generally the case. The female in this one has a whole bunch more black. And it doesn't really have, most of the time it has in this species has relatively little yellow. Relatively little red. We're looking at, I'd have to look it up. I don't have it ID'd here. This is it's because they're two similar species. This is either Nomada imbricata or Nomada luteoloides. Wow, we are getting tons of reflectance on that Clippius. That Clippius is just bright yellow. I think that's why we're saturating out here. There we go. But as you can see, once I get rid of the reflection, that Clippius is actually also covered in white hairs. What I want you to look at right now, though, and this often is like immediately you would know it's a male. See how inflated or broad the scapes are, and they're actually shorter, which is generally the case in males, that they're going to be shorter than the females. And if we see if we can get in even more here, you'll see that the pedicel, so here's, let me just push this forward a little bit. The pedicel, which is sort of the ball joint there above the scape, is actually sunk into, recessed into the end of the scape. So sometimes when people are not aware of this, they skip that and they'll get this as being a female because they did not count the pedicel because it's partially hidden. Different species hide it more or less than others. Color patterns are going to be really important. So the amount of yellow on the supraclypeus, the Clippius, the antennal, the scape, and then also when we're looking at Nomada, the length, the relative length rather than the absolute length of the antennal segments compared to T2 and T3 is extremely valuable, or not T, what am I saying? To flagellar segment 1 compared to 2 and 3 is important. I wonder if this is not, this should be shorter. So I may be looking at a different, something else. I haven't keyed it out, but in some of the members of this group, the fact that this antennal segment is about as long as that one separates them out. Usually in imbricata and luteoloides, this is relatively, maybe like 2/3 to half the length of that. So be it. We'd have to look it up to be sure. And I'm going to zoom out now. And in some of the males, particularly that group, sometimes called the Origeronus group, sometimes it has a different name, which is escaping me at the moment. The antennae are modified. There's actually tiny spines or a tiny spine on the underside of flagellar segment 3. and other shenanigans going on. But you can see here how yellow this is, but it has the same basic waspy look to it. And oops, we have to focus a little bit better. We got a lot of reflection on the yellows, but you can see that the patterns, the body shape is about the same, but there are different patterns in the presentation. If we go to the end of the abdomen now, and we look there where we might be trying to spy in a female, a pseudopygidial area, which would be present in this species if it were a female, but it is not. Instead, we have a pygidium, which someone can inform us all, I believe just is basically the notion is it is a plate. And get up a little higher. So the shape of this plate is a good indicator. So this is a pretty good sign within Nomada that if you're wondering what you're looking at, the presence of this pygidial plate is pretty much with this kind of size and shape is a pretty good sign that it is Nomada. So if you look at it, though, the end is often something that we use to split out different groups. Here it's notched a little bit. In others, it's completely rounded out. There's no notch, and that separates out some pretty good sized groups. You can see here the yellow on the abdomen forms complete bands on all these lower cases. A lot of times, I don't know if this is the case, on the first abdominal segment, the line can be broken in the middle, incomplete, broken, lots of different terms for that. And sometimes you'll see, I don't know if this will be the case or not, that you have a situation, it's sort of trending toward that, but you'll often see that a line is formed, but there is a slight channel here. Here it's eroded in the middle, where you can see, like it's almost complete. And there's a channel of darker integument in between, or sometimes a vague hint of a line. And because of the way Discover Life is set up, you can call it, both kinds of states. And when you have an ambiguous character like that, the CT are present in males in almost all cases in similar ways to the female, but as in many male characteristics, they're often a shadow of the female's characteristic, which means that it's often tricky to find the darn thing. So this is really the case with CT, where they can become, let's see if we can even find it on this thing, where they become extremely faint. Let's first see if we can get it in focus. So here we got some things going on. So with lighting, we might be able to, this might work. So there's the tip, and I see there's that little triangle, so we know somewhere over here would be the CT. In some cases, they don't exist, so the absence is an important character. This may be just simply hard to see, but nothing is standing out. We certainly don't see that dark red CT. There's hairs, but those would be the normal hairs, which would be present on a specimen in almost any case. However, a lot of times, particularly in the males, the CT that are representing the stronger female character are not dark red, even if it was a dark red, and it might be pale red and often much more translucent. So this is a little bit difficult here, but a lot of times what I would do is put my finger behind. I wonder if I can do that with the piece of
Clarification
paper.
that we're looking at the tip of the base tarsi.
No, we're looking at the tip of the tibia. And so sometimes adding some contrast behind will, particularly if these can be directly over a background, you can subtly rotate that around and you'll see, oh, there are some thicker hairs, which would be CT in there, and that can be, you know, your character. But oh boy, that is a tricky one, but it's the kind of thing you pick up more with experience. So I can't really see, like there's nothing there right now. Let's turn it though, that I would say is a something other than the normal hairs. I'm going to try one more time here. So here's the tibia, putting our X on it, end, and the hairs at the end are there. I'm going to run some light through. Now, I think, let me just do some focusing here. So I would have to look at this more in a better scope, and we're looking at it through a pipeline too. But it may very well be the case that 1, 2, 3 CT are there. Again, they're going to be bigger, darker, usually more robust in the female, but a lot of times you can find this shadow area. So this is some of the irritations, challenges, beauty of Nomada as you're looking at these little tiny characters. And the old keys and guides, like in Mitchell, are just like you go down mysterious rabbit holes. Even Discover Life, you have to be very precise. And if we have time, we'll go visit that. Very precise at the species level. Actually, we're not allowed to do species. To get some, so be conservative to get those kinds of identifications done. I'm going to show another character using a different species now. So it's set aside somewhere.
Questions while we switch around?
Yes, I have one.
Oops.
If you want to take a second to talk about our beats per minute and trying out mandibles and genitals, that's a conversation in the chat.
You want me to comment on that?
Yeah.
So both those characters can be, like genitals and mandibles, and tongues for that matter, are really useful, but they're such a pain in the butt to manipulate. And when you're working with like what we are, which are thousands of specimens, then we run into problems. I'm trying to look for this, do two things at once. What happened to that other specimen? I think it's this one, or is it this one? Yes, it is. So backing up, you can do that, but it takes a lot of time is basically the answer. And so our guides can sometimes mention those characters, but we de-emphasize them because of the workflow involved in pulling genitals and also manipulating the mandibles. And if you have had them in alcohol for a long time, often you end up just breaking things, and particularly isopropyl alcohol, which is generally not preferred. A lot of times, of course, you can't get straight ethanol, but you can if you use hardware store alcohol, which is almost always a 50-50 blend of ethanol, methanol, that does an adequate job. maybe not so great for DNA, but sometimes people can extract that from ours too. Anyway, it lets you have a better shot at I'm going to get the label off at pulling those two things. So in Discover Life Guides, we almost never mention genitalia. We do mention pretty regularly mandibles, and the reason for that is a lot of times, most of the time, as a matter of fact, you can look at the mandible, and even though it's closed, you can still see one end. Now, sometimes you're really frustrated because you would like to see a feature on the mandible, and the mandible is partially disguised by the basically the labrum clypeus edge. But you know, that's the way it goes sometimes. So what am I looking at here? Is it a female or a male? Let's go back to the rear end, where it looks like a male. This is a group that is often called or lumped into the microandrina group. We're going to look at it's male. Look at this pygidial area again. It's very, I think, very waspy looking. There's a whole batch of things that are similar. They tend to be way less common, so I'm always excited by seeing one. I don't know where this came from. This is in someone else's collection that I haven't ID'd. There's your notch in this case, so that's going to help splitting out. You can see a more complex structure to the maculations or the yellow bands. You know, that appears to be broken there. These are almost broken. That is broken, kind of. This looks like to be complete, and then looks like something else is going on there at T1. What I want to show you is a character state that is important because it splits out lots of specimens and groups, and that is the spines on the front coxa. So the front coxa are close to the base of the specimen of the legs, and so it's this big structure here, and we're going to have to zoom in and hopefully see this. One problem is there's often hairs down there, and what we're looking for is an extension of that coxa that forms a spine. It's hard. And in a lot of species, the coxa, which is right here, is just a smooth shape. But in some, and this is one of them, although not so easy to tell right at this point. So you have the coxa right here, and that is a hardened spine projection. It's not really a CT. I think they call them spines. I'm not sure how to differentiate the two, but projecting out. And a lot of times there's, like here, you have hair and goop and crud. And so you would just take your pin and run it around that edge. And, you know, if there is a little spine, the pin will let you know what's going on there. So let's see if I can see that on the other side there. I can't right now.
Is it fine on the coxa for males only?
I'm going to say, gosh, that's a good question. Females usually have other characters that I look at. I believe it is in both, though.
I think
Someone could mention that, but I believe it's in both.
We'll follow up with that in the email.
Okay.
Or someone in the chat can confirm or deny.
See if we can see the other coxa enough to see the spine, and it's over here, I believe, but I can't really. It's too many things going on in this picture. Or is it up here? Oh, that might be it there. See, I can't even tell for sure, but let's move it a little bit more again. So there's the head, legs. Okay, here we go. All right, there's the head. There's the front legs. Here's the coxa of the left side, coxa of the right side. And again, this is very common. The hairs, because there's a little bit of goop or water or whatever, have wrapped around the spines, which are there. So a lot of times I end up running a pin into that area to make sure that there is actually a spine there or not. And if we look at the base, so within the genus guide, you would, follow through a lot of the characters, and we'll jump there in our last remaining minutes.
Yeah, we have 15 minutes left.
Okay. But here, this sort of X pattern is this microandrina has that. You can see it's got a single blade sticking out, no bidentate. And the antenna tend to be shorter in this group, but that is probably too much information. So I'm going to now, I'll leave this in here, and we'll go to the guide and see if we can key down. So we're at the genus guide in Discover Life, and we are going to say that one, where was that one from? That's from Ontario. So I want to say that it's probably Nomada. Shouldn't do two things at once. Um, um, Iftonensis, but I could be wrong.
Have
All
one
right.
of our tags, I can look it up for you.
Pardon?
Does it have one of our tags? I can look it up for you.
It isn't. It isn't one of ours. And so we know where it came from, Ontario. We're down to 39 kinds of things. And indeed, Nomada is in there. We're going to skip over a lot of this insider pool thing. So we're going to say thorax primary color. In this case, it's black. So we're over here. And Nomada is still in there. Thorax or abdomen markings on the surface, not hair color. Let's see if there are any on there. I believe there are. There's usually, but in rare cases, there might not be any markings. So the scutum might be completely black, but the often the scutellum has yellow markings in there, and you can have pronotal collar, as you can see here. There's a bunch of yellow things. So here, scutum, basically black, but pronotal collar, maybe tegula, and scutellum, all with yellow. So we can safely click on here and click there. And now we're down to 10 things. The axilla, I'm not going to show this to you, but you know what we're looking for, is not sticking out. In Nomada, almost all of them have 3 submarginal cells. There is the rare one, obliterata, has 2, and there's a couple really rare things that, with some initial molecular work that Molly did, indicated that it was a different species, but we have only found 1 specimen of it. There are a couple others with 2, but you always have to be leery of things that just drop one of the submarginal cross veins. But in this case, it's 3. Oh my gosh, that was, both those combos. Look at that. We're down to 3 things. At this point, it's worthwhile unless you had some insider knowledge. Like, we could look at this right now and say, agapostumum, nope, and perdita, nope. I know from, my experiences, and you will too at some point, because these are radically different things. But let's just hit simplify to play along with the game. And I'm not going to do,
Can you compare images real quick?
yeah. So if we look, yeah, so you can vibe it here. So if we do compare images, we're seeing agapostomum. I think there's some load times going on here. So there's our green bee crowd. And the Nomada pictures and the Perdita pictures appear to be on their way. So first of all, length, because that's a fairly substantial one, might eliminate Perdita because they're small, almost always really small. And you can see how much more colorful the average Nomada is. And the Perdita are colorful, but also really small. And
If it takes too long, then they can just look at it.
all right, you can look at it. Hopefully you're following along. So we're going to go back and that it did not like that. Each web browser does different things. So I'm re-simplifying here, or maybe I didn't do that the first time. We have a male. So lengthwise, I'm going to eyeball that and say 10 and see what happens. It's probably going to drop Perdita, but has agaposmin. This is, again, something we encourage. Well, just, try out some things that maybe you're not 100% sure about and see what happens. But so some indications that Perdita should drop out just based on size. We're skipping over Ireland, and so female leg pollen cares. Well, we don't have a female, so we can't say anything. Shortcuts we're skipping because we don't have information. Another female character, male, head antennal length. This is basically how long the antenna is. And this is, what we're talking about is basically a short-ish antenna that's not particularly long. Oh, wait, why did that disappear? I would have called it short. Not only is long the females in the species not surpassing the posterior edge of tegula. I need to change that, I think, for this microandrina specimen, because I would definitely not call that long. In the other species, yes, it's long, moderately long. So there's a flaw. Claire, if you could make a note, we can change that. Secondary characters. So now we get back. Let's take a look at the wing thing again, because that's always something that people struggle with. Now, in this group, I don't know that I've ever bothered to look at the wing, but we're looking at the tip of the marginal cell, and we're going to zoom way in here and see if it meets Michener's criteria. So in Michener's book, which I think is public domain now, which is always worth getting. It's a guide to the genera of North American bees. The bee course still uses it. I'm not sure of its status. I think buying an original would be expensive, probably. All right, so here I'm going to move it there and go a little bit further. Okay, so marginal cell, there's the tip, but is that actual apex, that tip on the margin? No, it is not. But using measurements of the, I'm trying to get some different light shadow things going on here, of the veins there, you can see that the tip is not that far away. And if we go back to this character, and it says pointed with point laying right on the margin, or this is always the or part, which is a terrible thing to have in a guide. If bent away, then the tip less than 3 vein widths from the margin. So it was less than 3 vein widths. So let's do that and cross your fingers that Nomada stays in there, because that definitely is there. It does. So we can leave that in there. I think I'm going to not go any further because we know that there's a rock star agapostumum differential thing, which is the raised carina, which will show up. But there's actually quite a few other things in here, like the presence of a fovea that gets rid. Oh, that's a female character. That would get rid of the perdita. Here's your tongue thing. If you did have a tongue pulled, subintestinal sutures are differentiating a bunch of these things. The archedness, so agaposmin would be arched or not. I wonder where is the agaposmin character, which should, maybe it's not showing because we didn't score it for agaposmin versus nomada because literally almost no one uses that because you don't need to. It's such an obvious difference. So I think I'm going to stop there. And
If we have time, could we look at the little carina at the very edge of Nomada cheek? We have about 5 minutes.
oh, yes, although I don't know, I can show you where it is. I believe that this group does not have a carina, but I can show you where it would be on this one. And I don't think the other two that we were looking at, well, maybe. Let me see. Let's see if I can find one with a carina really quickly. Let me get the tag on. Don't lose the tag is always important. And put that there. And do a quick look here for something that might have a carina. How about this right here? I'm going to look under the microscope first. Which is hard because I've moved it too much. Nope, no carina there. But yeah, the presence of a carina is useful, or the absence of a carina is useful. How about this one?
Boothanii.
Sorry?
Boothanii is a suggestion. Or
Bethuniae?
Bethuniae.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my main collection is at the Smithsonian, which is absent right now. So I've just got some random boxes which don't have IDs on them. Goshomatic. Yeah, having a carina. Oh, we got one with a carina.
Huzzah.
Get some light back in shape here. And move things back. Here, find our center. And now we want to shift this to see the cheek, or the gena, as is technically known as. All right, so you're looking at the side of the head here. Let me get it in focus, and then we'll zoom in a little bit more. So it's actually very visible right now. So here's the eye, antenna. This is sort of upside down thorax. Right there, there's a carina, raised line, really, that is running along the edge of the cheek. Andrina has this in some groups that make it super distinctive. So when you see the strong carina there, that's helpful in splitting things out. And we'll zoom in a little bit more. And there we are. Maybe we'll, because we have a brand new species here, specimen. Let's see what we got for CT, although these legs appear to be tucked in pretty darn tight, which is, again, one of those problems with specimens in that they, unless you spend a lot of time prepping them, which is lovely, but is you have to be skilled at your manipulating under the microscope with your fingers. Then is that the middle? Oh, we might, I think the lower one here is the hind. Let's see if we can just, in our little bit of time left,
They're really tangled.
find.
It is 2 o'clock, but we
All right.
clearly.
All right. So are there any questions or are we done? Yeah.
Last call. But still do the setting if you have that.
I can look for it, but I think the problem is the legs are folded under, and I don't have a really great shot of that. Maybe upside down.
Well, this was a really good display for a bunch of screenshots. So I'll be posting those in the team. There are enough of them that I don't think I will just put them in a follow-up email. So that is, encouragement for you to join the team. Yeah.
If you can.
If you can.
All right, here. Oops. Here this is as magnified as I can get. And I may have it slightly. Okay, so hind tibia. There's the little triangle marker to its right, then would be the CT. There's the CT right there. I think there's probably 3, and I think what we're seeing is them in lined up in a different view. They should show up as individual things. Oops. This is sort of the main ID character sometimes for Nomada. Maybe it's one big CT2 right here. So it's this, whatever that is. Sometimes though, the CT can be extremely close together and even curved over, like imbricata and luteoloides. And you can see by the fact that I'm at high power right now. Oh, I can do, oh, that's like fake magnification. I'm at my resolution level. So it's like a glob at this point, but it's possible that these CT are coming out and folding over. So there's our marker triangle. So this is the CT there. I don't know what they're doing, at this, with this microscope and screen power. I can't tell much, but CT, very differential.
2 questions. First one, well, I'll do the one that has the easier answer. Are these CT different from tibial spurs?
Yeah, right here we have the tibial spurs right there. So the tibial spurs, I guess, also are coming out of the opposite side of the end of the tibia from the CT. So yeah, they are totally different things. In it, I don't know any character of tibial spurs that's useful in Nomada. It's all these hind tibia CT.
Okay. And where did the other question go? Since Nomada are parasites of Andrena commonly, did they evolve from Andrena adjacent ancestors?
Good question, and I don't know.
Let us know if you know. They're in different families. That's a good point.
Right.
Okay. Are we ready to wrap up? Any other? We did have in the chat, somebody mentioned that their person, like their government email, depending on if you're not DOI, but still public servant, that they can't access the team. I will suggest that you can join through your personal email account. So if that is a case for you, please send me an email and we can set that up for you.
I thought we were all one big happy family.
Yeah.
In the government.
DUI.
All right, what did I do with my glasses? There we go.
All right, I'm gonna stop recording now. You can always chat us.